I never imagined that such a terrifying event could unfold in my life. I had always seen those horror stories circulating online as mere fiction, exaggerated tales created to entertain and scare. However, everything changed on that fateful night. It was an ordinary night, and I was at home, completely alone, immersed in the calmness of my place. But slowly, the sense of safety that had always been with me began to fade. Everything seemed normal until I started hearing a faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from the front door. It was as if someone was testing the doorknob, and a wave of discomfort washed over me. I tried to ignore the sound, convincing myself that it was just the wind playing with the structure of the house. However, soon after, I heard footsteps outside, moving slowly, cautiously, as if someone were carefully circling my house. With my heart racing, I decided to look out the window, hoping it was just an illusion brought on by fear. As I looked, a chill ran down my spine. A man was standing right in front of the door, staring intently at the entrance, as if he were studying every detail with a sinister plan in mind. His presence was threatening and entirely undeterred by the lights illuminating the interior. The sight of him left me paralyzed. A mix of fear and adrenaline took hold of me, and I realized I was facing something far beyond the ordinary. I tried convincing myself that perhaps he was just a curious passerby or someone lost. But this idea quickly dissolved when he began knocking on the door, slowly and deliberately, each knock echoing in the night like a sinister warning that he was there, waiting, and that things were about to escalate. With each knock, the tension grew, and my mind raced at full speed. The fear became tangible, wrapping me in a blanket of dread and uncertainty. The possibility of being watched, of being the target of someone with sinister intentions, made me feel small and vulnerable in my own home. I didn't know what to do. My options seemed to evaporate as I fought against the paralysis of fear. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and what had once been a peaceful night turned into a living nightmare. My breathing grew shallow, and I knew I had to act. But what could I do against the shadow of an unknown man out there, determined to break through the barrier between us? The tension in the room intensified with each knock on the door, and the silence preceding each hit grew deafening. The man said not a word. His only communication was that rhythmic and disturbing sequence, like a macabre symphony of threats. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone, hoping to contact the police. However, when I looked at the screen, a chill ran through my body. No signal. In that moment, the reality of my situation hit. I was completely isolated, without communication, without anyone nearby who could help. Desperation began to mix with adrenaline, and I looked around for something I could use as a defense. The feeling of vulnerability was suffocating. My only viable option seemed to be grabbing a knife from the kitchen. Holding the blade firmly in my hand, I rushed to the bedroom, locking the door behind me, as if that simple gesture could offer some kind of security. I barely had time to catch my breath from the adrenaline rush when a sound sliced through the air like a knife, glass shattering. He had managed to get in. Panic consumed me as the echoes of his footsteps reverberated down the hallway, coming closer. Fear paralyzed me. Each movement was a monumental effort. He walked calmly, dragging his feet as if savoring every moment of my anguish, like a predator approaching its prey. The sound of his steps was unsettling and calculated, a psychological game that only amplified my terror. With each pause he made, I held my breath, hoping he'd give up, go back the way he came. But hope felt like an illusion. He wasn't there to give up. His presence grew increasingly oppressive, as if he were feeding off the tension that consumed me. The silence that followed was heavy with threats, and with each passing second, I felt the weight of fear intensify. The man wasn't just invading my physical space, he was intruding on my state of mind, turning every sound, every movement, into a spectacle of terror. I knew he was reveling in my despair, that each step toward me confirmed he was in control. I had to find a way to escape, but the thought of opening the door and facing the unknown froze me in place. Time felt suspended, and each beat of my heart echoed in my mind, creating a symphony of terror that blended with the footsteps drawing ever closer. All I could do was wait, pray that this nightmare wouldn't become reality. When the footsteps stopped outside the bedroom, a deep silence set in, surrounding me in an even more terrifying atmosphere. The sense that he knew I was there was almost palpable, and the tension grew with each second. I began to hear his breathing, slow and heavy, just outside the door, and the sound almost echoed my own anxiety. It was as if he was enjoying my despair, savoring my vulnerability. Then, a light knock on the door pierced the silence, followed by a cold, low whisper. "Are you coming out?" Those words reverberated in my mind like a sinister warning, and I realized that if I opened the door, I'd have no chance of defending myself. The choice between staying hidden or risking an encounter with the unknown was an agonizing dilemma, and fear's paralysis held me back. For a few moments, the silence was so profound that I could hear my own breathing, an uneven rhythm driven by anxiety. I waited, tense and unsure of what to do, dreading any sound that might signal the nightmare's continuation. Time dragged on, and the uncertainty became mental torment. Finally, when courage began to build within me, I decided to open the door, hoping the threat had gone. But when I looked around, the house was empty. What had once been my refuge now seemed like a horror scene. The footprints on the floor, the shattered glass scattered across the space, the forced door. All of it reminded me he had been there and, for some reason, had decided to leave, at least for now. Since that night, a shadow hangs over my life. Fear has become a constant companion, following me like an invisible shadow. I can no longer sleep peacefully. Every noise at night, every whisper of the wind, becomes a cruel reminder that he might come back. The feeling that he's simply waiting for the next opportunity to return haunts me incessantly, and even in the daylight an unease settles in my chest. The home that once brought me security is now a place of constant vigilance, and the uncertainty of what might happen at any moment turns each day into a challenge. My world has become a battle against anxiety and fear, a fight to regain what I lost, but the shadow of his presence remains, reminding me that terror can return when least expected. I had always believed the security of my home was unshakable, a sheltered refuge where nothing could harm me. Situated on a quiet street, surrounded by friendly neighbors who greeted each other whenever they met, my house was a true home. However, on a rainy night, as a storm raged outside, that sense of safety was abruptly shattered. As I settled on the couch to watch a movie, a strange and unsettling noise began to echo through the house, coming from the kitchen. At first, I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the strong wind or rain beating against the windows. But as the sound repeated, growing in intensity and urgency, my heart began to race, filling my chest with a mix of anxiety and fear. Rising slowly, I took care not to make any unnecessary noise as the tension in the air was palpable. I walked towards the kitchen door, each step bringing me closer to the unknown. The darkness felt dense and oppressive, almost alive, with the only source of light being a flickering hallway bulb that cast unsettling shadows on the walls. When I finally reached the door, what I saw on the other side froze my senses. The kitchen window was ajar, letting in the cold night air, and inside the room, a shadow moved stealthily. An instinctive urge for self-preservation took over, and a surge of adrenaline coursed through my body, making me hesitate. I instinctively took a step back, unsure if I should run or stay, to discover what was happening. An internal conflict consumed me. The urge to flee to safety battled against the curiosity and terror that kept me rooted in place. My hands were cold, and my breathing quickened with each passing second. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw the figure of a man, or what seemed to be a man, crouched in a dark corner of the kitchen. His gaze was enigmatic, impossible to decipher, and he appeared completely unaware of my presence. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, adrenaline pounding in my veins, as I wondered what this stranger was doing inside my home on such a stormy night. After a few seconds that dragged on like hours, I finally found enough courage to return to the living room and grab my phone. Desperation set in, and when I tried to call the police, I realized the connection was down. A wave of disbelief washed over me. How could this be happening? I looked out the window and saw that the rain had intensified, the droplets transforming into a dense curtain that blurred my view of the outside world. The sky seemed to weep in response to my growing fear. My heart was pounding wildly, nearly to the point of fainting, and I questioned what I could possibly do. Every thought in my mind felt like a distant echo as the tension in the house thickened. At that moment, the kitchen door began to open slowly, creaking as if pushed by an invisible force. When the figure finally emerged, I could see him more clearly. He was tall, with a vacant, emotionless expression that sent chills down my spine. His eyes shone in a disturbing, almost supernatural way, reflecting a light that shouldn't have been there. His attire was strange, like something straight out of a horror movie, with worn and outdated clothes that seemed out of place. Terror gripped me with overwhelming force. I knew I needed to escape immediately, but to my dismay, the only viable exit was the front door, and he was blocking my way, a solid barrier between me and freedom. The sense that my time was running out hit hard, and my survival instincts ignited, driving me to search desperately for anything that could serve as a defense. With my heart pounding in my ears, I began to frantically search around me. My hands trembled as I tried to find something, anything that could protect me. Terror and adrenaline mixed in a chaotic dance within me. Finally, my eyes landed on a glass bottle sitting on the coffee table. With a surge of desperation, I grabbed it and raised it, ready to use it if needed. The figure in front of me moved slowly, as if preparing for something, and I knew every second counted. The situation had become unbearable, and the only thing keeping me standing was the determination not to let myself become a victim. The moment for action was approaching, and I had to be ready to fight or flee, depending on what that mysterious shadow intended to do next. With a strength I didn't know I had, I pushed a heavy piece of furniture nearby, creating an improvised barrier between us. The figure hesitated for a moment, his expression unreadable, caught in a brief confusion, but he quickly began moving toward me, his gaze fixed and resolute. My survival instincts kicked in, and I wasted no time. I ran to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me with a sound that echoed through the oppressive silence of the house. My mind raced with plans for escape, but all I could envision was the empty street outside, devoid of anyone to help me. The sound of the rain pounding against the windows was nearly deafening, and I knew he was out there, lurking, waiting for me. After what felt like an eternity, a noise broke the silence. He was trying to get in. The creak of the door under his weight made me realize the lock wouldn't hold forever. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and the only thought in my head was to stay calm and act clearly. The feeling of helplessness threatened to consume me, but in that moment of despair, I made a decision. I needed to face my fear, no matter how paralyzing it was. The sound of the door creaked again, and reality hit me hard. If he got in, everything I knew would change forever. Summoning the last remnants of my courage, I prepared for the confrontation. Time seemed to stretch, each second a reminder of the gravity of the situation. With the door about to give way, the urgency to fight settled over me like a primal instinct. The real fight for survival was about to begin, and I knew I had to act quickly and decisively. Fear and adrenaline merged into a powerful fuel, feeding my determination. I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon, ready for what was to come. Uncertainty loomed, but my will to fight for my life burned intensely, guiding me through the chaos. As the door finally burst open with a bang, I grabbed a chair and positioned myself, braced for any movement. He entered, his crazed stare fixed on me, but before he could advance, I hurled the chair in his direction. The impact startled him, making him stumble. I seized that split second to dash to the window, which I'd left slightly open, and threw myself outside. The fall was painful, but the adrenaline urged me onward. Rain poured down like a curtain, and the darkness swallowed me as I ran toward the street. I screamed for help until a neighbor heard and rushed toward me. He immediately called the police, and when I looked back, I saw that man fading into the night, like a nightmare dissipating. I was in shock but relieved to be free. My house was no longer a safe haven, but I had survived, and the experience was etched in my memory, a reminder of the terror that could have changed everything.